Hey noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and as people with a strong interest towards history, have you ever stopped to ask yourself how much harder would have life been for people in the past, particularly when you stop to think about all the different modern commodities that we are used to be honest, take for granted. From public transportation to the weather forecast, to computers, to more computers that just pretend to be phones, the modern world has given us people of the present many ways to make our lives more comfortable, particularly when compared to people in the past. Hunter-gatherers risk their lives just to get lunch. We just go to the nearest supermarket and complain if they sold out that specific brand of cereal we like. Oh my god, how am I gonna survive the 5 minutes drive to the other supermarket down the road? Now compare that with spending an entire day in a forest with a flint spear. However, there are many things we oftentimes call modern, such as say optical illusions or dental hygiene, which in fact existed in ancient times, which means that by definition they are not modern per se as a general concept. What we have now is just a more advanced version of something that has been with us humans for a very long time. Well, today I've gathered 10 very surprising modern things that ancient Romans had. Number 10. Postal service. Hey, will you look at that? I've got a package here. Luckily in the modern era we've got functioning postal services. By the way, if you want to know what this is, check out my Patreon page, link in the description, shameless plug. I wonder if the Romans had those. Actually, the ancient Romans had a fully functioning postal service that, in many ways, was quite similar to what we have now. It was called cursus publicus in Latin, and it was introduced by Emperor Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus Augustus. It consisted of designated stop stations placed near main roads and important communication routes. Inside these stations you had a series of slaves that functioned as messengers who could walk or run to the nearest station to deliver messages, letters, parcels, etc. With time, these stations obtained stables, horses, and their own supply of horse feed. Imagine it this way. You had a certain territory within which the Roman postal service would function, would operate. Now you had many of these stations. The actual term for these stations is mutationes or mansiones, and these are two different kinds. The mansiones were actually the bigger one, and you would have one for every 6 mutationes. The ones that I've just described are the mutationes, the regular stations. Well, what's different about these ones here is the fact that these were not only bigger, but the messengers could actually spend the night. They could sleep, which is why you would have one every 6. Now, you know how today we also have the option to use, say, private senders to deliver letters and packages, I don't know, mailboxes, etc., FedEx. Well, the ancient Romans also had this possibility. You generally speaking had two options: either give your letter or package to a merchant that you know is going to the city where you want your package or letter delivered to for a price, or you assign the duty to one of your slaves. So basically, if you are the owner of land and slaves, you can use one of your slaves. You don't necessarily need to use the sort of public postal service. Although, of course, the slave could be killed, in which case, it is what it is. Number 9. Materials. Now hear me out, because things are going to get really interesting here. Obviously, whenever we think of the materials that ancient people had access to, clearly if you compare it to the sort of materials we've got in our day and age, yes, there are a lot of things that they didn't have access to. For example, clearly the Romans didn't have plastics, and they did not have, here it is, titanium. This is a cube of pure titanium here. They would have friggin' loved this one. And whenever we think of the classical period, which is after the Iron Age, we think, of course, they had iron, they had copper, bronze, that kind of material, wood, stone. But check this out. There are some materials that you probably would expect to also be modern that they actually had, and that might surprise you. So let me tell you 3. The ancient Romans had access to plywood, concrete, and steel. So how do we define plywood? Well, technically plywood is a material manufactured from thin layers of wood. These layers are glued together with adjacent layers having their wood grain rotated. Polybius, Roman writer, does give us some very interesting descriptions on how they built shields, particularly in the Republican period, and then we have got, of course, the material evidence that we can compare it to. And many Roman shields were in fact made by overlapping layers of thin wood placed at a different orientation to increase their strength. When it comes to Roman concrete, of course it's different in its ingredients and fundamental materials to modern concrete, but it still is concrete. Modern concrete is typically made with Portland cement, a mixture of silica sand, limestone, clay, chalk and other ingredients. But Roman concrete was a mixture of volcanic ash, lime and seawater. This was done in order to take advantage of a chemical reaction which the Romans not only had observed naturally, but also understood in tough rocks, in other words, cemented ash deposits. The Romans created a rock-like concrete that thrives in open chemical exchange with seawater. Last but not least, steel. Sometimes a little bit of a nomenclature battle, but in general we can all agree that iron, with the addition of a certain percentage of carbon, turns into steel. The steel that the Romans used wasn't as advanced as the one used, for example, in the late Middle Ages, but we know that they used it understanding the process behind it. And I think this myth of the idea that steel wasn't available until the modern era is more of a misunderstanding of steel itself, which has been around since the Iron Age, and the mass production of steel, which indeed is a modern thing. Number 8. Beware of the dog. So you know how we people keep dogs in our home? Well, the Romans did it too, as pets. See, you could be a Roman. Dogs were considered domestic animals that people liked having in their homes, for affection, but also for protection, and this connects to our fun fact. Are you gonna protect me? Yeah, good luck with that. You wouldn't scare a chicken, because you're a biscottino. Biscottino. You know signs like this one, beware of the dog, that some people put outside of their houses or near the gates of their yards? Well, the Romans did it too. The Romans often placed cave canem. The Romans distinguished the following types of dogs: guard, hunting, luxury, fighting, and shepherd dogs. And each class had its recommended breed, size, and even color. For example, black dogs were usually supposed to be, or recommended to be used as guard dogs. Number 7. Dental hygiene. This one is gonna gross you out. In our day and age, we're all about dental hygiene, or at least we're all encouraged to be. From dental clinics to toothpaste, toothbrushes, controversial mouthwashes, we've got it all. But surely enough, the Romans cared about the health of their teeth, the freshness of their breath, and the whiteness of their smile as well. That's all good and dandy, but wait until you hear how they did it. The Romans used animal or human urine to whiten their teeth. Yeah, I'll choose yellow teeth any day of the week. Number 6. Underwear. Most often than not, the Romans are represented in either their very characteristic tunics or their very sumptuous formal togas. But have you ever stopped to wonder what's underneath all of those tunics? You kinky muppet. Well, have a look at these representations here. They look quite modern once you think about it, don't they? Indeed, the Romans wore undergarments and underwear. There were even regulations for example, gladiators that they were expected to be wearing underwear. You know, we're here for a spectacle. Not that kind though. As we can see from this image, women often liked exercising in underwear. Of course, both the material and the look would have been different from modern ones, but the idea of wearing underwear, absolutely not modern. Number 5. Latin profanities. Now, check this one out. Normally, whenever we imagine the way the ancient Romans talked, we have this idea of this very powerful, sophisticated, educated, aristocratic, even powerful, authoritative language that is classical Latin. That, of course, also existed, but it is also important to understand that that does not represent the entirety of what Latin sounded like all the time, everywhere. Imagine that there is a natural disaster, and all video and audio footage of how English sounds in our day and age is completely erased, except for the recordings of university professors and their lectures. And then in about 2000 years, people imagine they give you that as the only example they have. And then the reason why that's not really a realistic way to imagine how people on the streets trying to buy lunch sounded like is because even in English, the way a professor speaks during a lecture is full of terminology, grammar, syntax, intonation that don't represent the way you talk to your friends when you play Call of Duty. Latin could also be vulgar as a spoken, alive language, and believe it or not only the Romans really liked profanities, but their favorite ones were the sexual-based ones. Number 4. Optical illusions. Who doesn't love a nice optical illusion? It freaking makes your brain blow up. In our day and age, these are the prerogative of science vlogs, very talented artists, and the like of Vsauce. And that might give us the wrong impression that optical illusion were also a sort of scientific discovery that is modern. Well, it wasn't. In the classical period, they oftentimes used optical illusions in a very ingenious way, not only as a form of decoration in the sense that, hey, check this out, if you look at it from here, it's gonna look different. They also use it as a way to correct architectural features that would otherwise look odd. That's smart. Number 3. Running water. Clean water is not unusual today, especially in developed countries. Tap or faucet in the bathroom, in your kitchen, every day you don't even think about it. Unlimited amounts of water for personal and private use. Not even that expensive. Readily available supply of clean water? It must be a modern thing. No. Ancient Rome was really impressive. Whenever we think of the English word aqueduct, well, it actually comes from the Latin aquaeductus, water line. Generally, an aqueductus will be used to transport water to a Roman city from a natural spring, which most often was coming from a mountain. They were built according to the principle of continuous drainage. The capital city of Rome is probably the most impressive one, since the city, with its 1 million inhabitants, had 11 aqueducts that were totaling 420 kilometers of water supply. And what you might not know is that only 47 kilometers of which were above Earth's surface. Imagine that kind of construction. This sophisticated network was able to provide 1 million cubic meters of water to Rome every day. So what was this water used for? Fountains, wealthier homes and properties, baths and public toilets. Even some relatively cheap houses could have access to running water, but normally it was just the ground floors. So people living on the second, third, fourth floor would not have access to running water, which is why higher floors were cheaper. Number 2. Lighthouses. Now, of course, there is a very long story of development when it comes to lighthouses. In the early forms were nothing but controlled fires on hilltops near the coastlines to warn ships that they were approaching land. Now, not only the Romans did know how to make lighthouses, but did you know that the oldest still working, still functioning lighthouse in the world is indeed, you guessed it, Roman, and it's in Spain. It's called the Tower of Hercules. It is the only Roman lighthouse that has survived to our time. Originally, it was 37 meters high, and this height has been preserved since antiquity. In the 18th century, the tower's height was expanded to 68 meters. Still, the 37 meters high tower for the times of the Roman would have been one of the tallest buildings that they had ever erected. It contained 3 floors, 4 rooms on each floor. Now, how did they achieve the illumination? The illumination was achieved with a large stone oil lamp. Of course, that alone wouldn't have been enough, therefore the light was amplified through reflection by polished surfaces. Number 1. Microorganisms. Now, I left best for last, so first of all, thank you for reaching this part of the video and putting up with me, but be ready to have your mind blown, because this is gonna be like... The Romans knew about bacteria. We usually learn in school that it was in the 19th century when researchers saw microorganisms under microscopes, and that's true. And also that the idea of bacteria goes back to the 17th century. But if you've ever read the De Re Rustica, written by Marcus Terentius Varro, your opinion might change. He writes, "Precautions must also be taken in the neighborhood of swamps, both for the reasons given, and because there are bred certain minute creatures which cannot be seen by the eyes, which float in the air and enter the body through the mouth and nose, and there cause serious diseases." How did Varro know? At the end of the day, he did say that the creatures were not visible. Perhaps that might remain a mystery, at least for now. Oh my gosh, the ancient Romans were so horrible, bloodthirsty, they liked gladiatorial combat. We modern people are not like that. It's my lucky day, it's my lucky day. I think sometimes we don't fully appreciate how uncunningly similar to us the ancient Romans were. Okay, we've got 10 more to go, let's get started. Number 10. Heated floors. Winter is coming. Well, most of us don't have to worry about that with our warm homes and our central heating system. And perhaps later you've been considering installing those fancy heated floors. Luxuries of the modern time, right? Wrong, because the ancient Romans had it too. Well, the wealthy ones. In ancient Rome, this technology was called hypocaustum. So how did it work? Hot air, a system of chambers, and hollow bricks. Allow me to explain. Underneath the floor of some Roman houses, you had controlled burning fires that were producing hot air. And this was both a primary system in the sense that it created the heat, but it was also a secondary system because it distributed it throughout the building. And when I say building, I don't just mean private houses, but also public baths, Roman spas and many other types of public buildings. The floor was laid out as a series of concrete slabs raised up on tiles. The furnace would be at the bottom of one exterior wall. The draft would take the heat under the floor and up through the walls. A lot of planning went into this. The height of the tiles was decided to be 60 centimeters or 2 feet because it was considered to be the most effective height for the heat to travel through. The air was then pulled up through the walls because of the fact that, of course, hot air tends to rise, but also because of the vacuum that was created. So in other words, if you would walk bare feet into one of these Roman buildings, not only the floor would be nice and warm, but so would the walls, since the bricks of said walls had holes so that the air would warm them up. Walls and floors. Hold on a minute. Are you saying that the ancient Roman version is nicer? The fuel was mainly small branches and twigs. The reason why they chose that is because if you used logs, they would burn too slowly to be effective. Number 9. Coin-operated machines. Check this out. The first account of a coin-operated device was written by Hero of Alexandria in the 1st century AD, so pretty much contemporary to this armor. Now, given he was technically ethnically Greek, but he was a subject of the Roman Empire, so shut up, it counts. He tells us about several peculiar mechanical hydraulic designs, but the one we are dealing with now was at a temple. The machine had a slot, mind-blowing I know, and then you drop a 5 drachm coin into the slot and that activates a lever. Say this is the lever. The coin comes here, touches this end, so this other end goes up, right? Now the rear end of the lever is connected through a plug to a tank of water. After a set amount of water had been dispensed, the lever reached an angle by which the coin would fall, relieving the lever of the weight so that it would reset. And you thought you were being smart with the puzzles in God of War. Great game, by the way. Go get them, Jacksepticeye. Number 8, graffiti. You know that edgy kid that does graffiti with the hairstyle? F the system, bro. Not original. Like by a long shot. You know when you Google it and they tell you, oh yeah, modern day graffiti art dates back to 1967 Philadelphia? Nonsense! The ancient Romans loved being edgy with graffiti 2,000 years ago. Well, to be fair, probably they date back to the cavemen in the prehistorical period, but you know what I mean. Yeah, okay, some Romans did graffiti, but how widespread was it? Well, have you ever been to Pompeii? Herculaneum, anyone? Well, guess. Now seriously, guess how many graffiti archaeologists found in ancient Rome? 100, you say? 1,000? Well, try 11,000 graffiti in Pompeii alone. Well, literally, calm down, ancient Romans. So what the heck did they write? Well, from existential ramblings to jokes, admonitions, political opinions, and insults. Like a lot of insults. Okay. Where did they like drawing these graffiti? Well, sometimes in public houses, other times in baths, taverns was another popular one, and of course, private domestic residences. In fact, sometimes it was even used as a form of artistic expression and poetic expression. So next time you see a modern kid destroying the facade of historic buildings with their graffiti, tell them, Aue Caesar, and then call the police. Now, if you are enjoying this list, make sure to watch until the end. But before we continue with the list, I would like to mention the very kind sponsor that made this video possible, Atlas VPN, because they have a very interesting offer for you. Number 7. Swiss Army knives. Oh my gosh, I love this list. Everyone loves Swiss Army knives, they're so useful. Don't you love Swiss Army knives? Well, if you do, how about we come up with a more appropriate name? Yeah, forget the Swiss, Roman Army knives. I mean, no hate to my Swiss subscribers, you're great with cheese and chocolate, but hey, check this Muppet out. Displayed at the Roman Antiquities Gallery in Cambridge. My gosh, when did that happen? That's incredible. Well, it's been there for 20 years, mate. The 3 inches by 6 inches, 8 centimeters by 15 centimeters knife was excavated from the Mediterranean area. It was a Roman implement which dates back to 200 AD, made from silver but with an iron blade. It has a spoon, fork, spike, spatula, and small toothpick. So what about the spike? What's that used for? Well, experts believe that the spike was used to extract the meat from snails. Did you hear that, French? Romans did it too. But you can have them. I'll stick to lasagna. To be fair, this would have been sort of a custom piece, not something that you would find everywhere, but still. Pretty impressive. Number 6. Construction cranes. Okay, we all know that the ancient Romans were masters of construction, but they didn't just do it by themselves, they did come up with some very ingenious tools and building machines. For instance, the crane. Now given it wasn't their idea, it was the Greeks' idea, but the Romans took it and improved it. In fact, they had several varieties. What did they use them for? For all sorts of public buildings and also for building aqueducts. Now, aqueducts were one of the 10 special things that I talk about in my previous iterations. I won't cover them here again. Link in the description, you imperial subject. So let me tell you instead about these 3 different kinds of cranes. Crane number 1 is the wheel crane, very simple design used to lift stones. Crane number 2 called pentaspastos, which had 5 pulleys. But probably one of the most sophisticated was the polyspastos, which had 15 pulleys and up to 4 masts with a ratio of 60:1. It had 4 operators per side and it could have a maximum load lifting capacity of 6,000 pounds, which could be doubled if manual work was replaced with a drum. Number 5. Physician's bags. You know, the bag that doctors usually carry around. Well, many cultures claim the invention. We don't know if it was the Greeks first or the Egyptians, but what we do know is that the Romans had them too. Now, of course, you can't talk about these sort of physicians' medical bags without talking about Hippocrates, because he's the one who mentions the contents of such bags. But it's Galen that mentions what the ancient Roman physicians used and the Greeks, and he says that among the many metallic instruments, some were made of iron, some of copper, and some of copper alloy. Link in the description. Now, doctors in ancient Rome had all sorts of assistants. If you're an English speaker, which I suppose you are since you've reached number 5 on this list, if you are an English speaker, you will recognize immediately what these assistants' jobs were. Pharmacopolae, unguentarii, aromatarii, and the capsarii were the ones that would prepare and carry the doctor's capsa, which means physician's bag. Number 4, sewer system. Okay, so the ancient Romans had sewers. The sewers probably had mice. 5 by 7 divided by 6. Yes, we should be able to begin a D&D campaign in ancient Rome. So it is estimated that the very first sewage system in ancient Rome was built in the 8th century. Of course, this would have been a very basic drainage system, probably just used to drain marshes and runoffs, if you will. However, 400 years we are in the 4th century BC during the reign of the Etruscan kings, and here we are. The Cloaca Maxima was built. Cloaca Maxima, that'd make a great insult. Shut up, you Cloaca Maxima. Cloaca Maxima. Your cousin is such a Cloaca Maxima. Okay, so initially the Cloaca Maxima was a central sewage collection and disposal system. But finally, at the end of the 1st century BC, during the reign of Augustus, it was closed. I want to say for obvious reasons. Good job, Augustus. Then after the innovation of the sewage system, finally aqueducts became popular because of course you needed a lot of water to sort of wash off the remains of all this drainage. And then latrines became popular both in public and private housing. How a latrine can be popular is beyond me, but great for socialization in ancient Rome. Sorry for that mental image. Number 3. Fast food. Say you're craving Big Mac and McDonald's fries, but you're in ancient Rome. What do? Well, you go to Roman Thermopolia. You won't exactly get the same Big Mac that you get today, as one of the commonly known type of meats that was served there was honey roasted rodent. Lots of good wine though. Allegedly, a lot of these Thermopolia didn't really have a great image in the popular mind, but they were fast and very convenient, and oftentimes people not only bought them but just ate the food quickly, oftentimes even standing. Number 2, steam-operated machines. You've got to be joking. Now this one comes with a massive caveat, since we are only really talking about a very rudimentary machine, but the first steam engine is actually mentioned by Vitruvius between 30 and 15 BC. And the steam engine mentioned by Vitruvius is not even the only one that was present in ancient Rome. We know that there were several prototypes of functioning steam engines, but they never really went beyond the concept of prototype. Still quite impressive that they figured that one out. So even though the core concept was there, it couldn't really be used the same way as, say, industrial age steam engines were used, and how much of a game changer those were. We're stepping a little bit into the hypothetical here, but could have the Romans invented the modern steam engine? A difficult question to answer because, again, it's very speculative. Some people say that the centrifugal governor, which the ancient Romans didn't have, would be a key piece of invention to make a steam engine do useful work. And without getting too complicated, without the centrifugal governor, it's really difficult to control the sort of pressure created by the steam engine itself and the boiler. Maybe they could have come up with a different idea of separate boiler. It's really unanswerable. Number 1. Use it every day. It's part of your daily life. The calendar. The calendar as a concept goes who knows how far back. Ancient Greek lunar calendars, original systems from Babylon. The reason why, however, I decided to put the calendar within this list, even though I think most people know this, is because the calendar that we use today is absolutely connected to the one invented by the Romans, or should I say, one of the calendars invented by the Romans. The Roman Republican calendar was a dating system that evolved in Rome prior to the Christian era. Legend says that Romulus made it. Yeah, okay, whatever. The original Roman calendar was a little different to the modern one. It consisted only of 10 months and a year of 304 days. You can imagine that by the 1st century BC, the situation had become so confused that the calendar couldn't be used anymore. A modified version was created by Julius Caesar or Julius Caesar, the Julian calendar in 46 BC, and later reformed by Augustus in 8 BC. Finally, this will be the base of the Gregorian calendar that will be introduced in October 1582 by Pope Gregory XIII, a modification of the Julian calendar, which is what we use today. Alright, Noble Ones, well I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you're not yet members of this community, become a Noble One. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Don't forget to check out the link in the description below to make use of the incredible offer Atlas VPN has for you in store. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Valete. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much.